going to move to item 3.4. Vice Chancellor Russell, please introduce the subject.
Thank you very much, President Himmelstein and members of the Board of Governors. The California community colleges have been engaged with the California Council for the Humanities on a major project, and so I thought it would be good to bring the CEO and president of that organization to you to give kind of an overview of this large project, and I'm happy to say that he has engaged the community colleges successfully and has become a great partner and a good friend in the process.
Great. Thanks so much. And Barry, thanks so much for your support during this process. Chancellor Scott, Board of Governors, thanks for taking a few minutes to hear me out. And members in the audience, I hope as you see this presentation, you can think about ways in which community colleges can be further involved. I'm the president of the California Council for the Humanities. We're a nonprofit organization, and we believe ideas can connect California, and that it's important, in fact, fundamental to our democracy, that people understand and know our history and study philosophy and literature. We have a board of directors from across the state, and most recently, President Ben Duran of Merced Community College served on our board, great guy, and currently Sandra Serrano, the Kern County president, is on our board, and so we have deep connections to the community college system. What I'm going to talk with you today is about an initiative called Searching for Democracy. And listening to the past few minutes of your conversation, I can tell you're well-versed in democracy. So this is a statewide initiative to get Californians to explore the meaning and requirements of democracy leading into the November 2012 presidential elections. This statewide initiative will begin in February and take place throughout 2012 until those elections. While some will be searching for candidates, through this initiative we'll be searching for democracy itself. Why are we doing this? The historian Taylor Branch, famous civil rights historian, said democracy demands public trust. And right now in our society, a recent poll told us that 89% of the public does not trust government. Further, Thomas Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. And this year, national test scores tell us that 3 out of 4 students lack a basic understanding of democracy. So if you talk with people about what's the state of our democracy, you often hear a sense of hopelessness. But, you know, we as humans, our reason, our imagination, the humanities, we created democracy. So we have those tools to sustain democracy. How are we going to do this? We've been working with Barry and other partners across the state to create a statewide initiative. You all have heard of One City, One Book programs. Well, we decided to take it one step further and do it 5 books, the whole state, to create a statewide conversation. The 5 books we selected, we thought, let's begin with the foundation of our democracy, the Constitution. It's time that people, if 4 out of 5 students don't understand the basic tenets of our democracy, let's explore the meaning of the Constitution. The other books include Farewell to Manzanar, which is about the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II. Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here, which I just read last year, and it's a fascinating story about fascism taking over the U.S. The 4th book is A Paradise Built in Hell, a San Francisco author who explores human nature and how we act in times of disaster, and believe it or not, it's a hopeful book. She says that in times of disaster, we see the best of who we are. We see that we want to help one another, and ask the question, what if we brought that same spirit into our daily working? And what kind of profound impact would that have on our democracy? And the 5th book is by Daniel Alarcón. Daniel is 33 years old. This book he wrote in 2008. It was selected by the Washington Post, the LA Times, Christian Science Monitor as the best work of fiction in 2008. The New Yorker just said he was one of the 20 authors under 40 that we should pay attention to. and it's a brilliant story. So we've been working very closely with libraries across the state, and we have now commitments from communities across the state. You see all these red dots. Those red dots translate into places like Calexico, San Diego County, all of LA County, Riverside County, San Bernardino, Mono, up to Mount Shasta, Tehama County, all San Francisco. All of these communities are going to be participating in a statewide read. They've selected one or more of those books. I'll give you an example. Here in Sacramento, in the fall 2012, they're going to be talking about the Constitution. So they'll have discussion groups in libraries across the city. K through 12 will be participating. KVIE, public television, and public radio will come on board. The Sacramento Bee is on board. CSU will be on board. It would be wonderful to think about how the community college system in this area could participate. They're going to invite in such scholars as Justice of the Supreme Court Kennedy, the fellow who from University of Pennsylvania who edited or annotated the Constitution for Penguin Books will come in. It's going to be a big happening in Sacramento. And these kinds of things will be happening in communities like this across the state. Already, community colleges are participating. Chabot College in Hayward. Santa Monica City College is working with Santa Monica. Fresno City College. San Diego Community College. I'd like to see more participation across the state. And what would it take for every community college to participate is a question I'm asking. Barry's been helping me with this. We've been thinking about humanities scholars leading discussions in communities. Campus-wide reads at community colleges. So like in Sacramento, what if every incoming person read the Constitution and participated in discussions across Sacramento? What I would say is this would, community colleges demonstrate their value every day, but getting them out into the communities and this participants in this type of community-wide happening would again demonstrate that even more. So that's the statewide book club. There are other pieces of this. We're going to have public dialogues in 7 to 10 places across the state with scholars like Stephen Carter of Yale, Randall Kennedy of Harvard, Robert Putnam, bringing them to California to engage in conversations. Such topics as, is civility overrated? What could kill democracy? How do we cultivate a democratic culture? And of course, community colleges are central to all these conversations. Another piece of this Searching for Democracy initiative is a traveling exhibition which opened at De Anza Community College. Now, this exhibition looks at the history of civil rights in California. The first time this has been done on a large scale, that whole history from the founding of the state to today. I call it moments when people have stood up for democracy. This is available for just a couple of $100s to community colleges across the state, and I'd like to see it travel to as many community colleges as possible. So far, it's Humboldt State. Like I said, De Anza has it in Cupertino, Saracosa Community College in Bishop. It's something that's easy to put up, easy to anywhere in community college campuses, and I think it's the education it provides is really important. We'll also have a series of webinars called Teaching Democracy, and we'll bring in some of the foremost scholars in the nation to talk with professors and teachers K through 16 about how to talk about issues like the intentions of the framers of the Constitution. Who is a citizen? These are all Pulitzer Prize-winning historians, National Book Award historians, people like Jack Rakoff at Stanford, Joyce Appleby at UCLA, Clarence Walker, Alan Taylor here at UC Davis. So these are going to be great opportunities for teacher training, professor training, and I'd love for community college affiliated people to be participants in these. We also have grant opportunities which are up to $10,000 for democracy-themed projects, and I know a number of community colleges have participated in those. Our next deadline for that is November 15th. So as you can see, it looks like confetti is strewn across the state. A lot of participation in this democracy initiative. Again, it kicks off in late February, March, and will lead into the national election. Most activities are taking place in the fall, and it just seems like it would be a great opportunity for community colleges. We see right now we have a list of great partners, state libraries, community colleges already, CSU, California Center for the Book, National Endowment for the Humanities, Penguin Books, NPR affiliates, UC, it goes on. What the California Council will provide for this initiative is high-quality content, teacher curriculum, discussion guides, coordination of all the different players in the state, umbrella public relations, we're working with a PR firm, and a dynamic hub online where we'll have author interviews, we'll have ways for people to interact with the content. My final message is democracy is not an outcome, but an experiment. And in my mind, community colleges are central to this experiment. Searching for democracy is an opportunity to demonstrate community college centrality in communities across the state. So I know you're doing great work within the community college. We would like to use this as an opportunity to leverage and highlight community college faculty and students in the communities that are participating across the state. I'm looking to Barry and you all if you have ideas about how your community colleges can participate. Thank you for all you do for California. I know what you do sitting up there is a lot of work, and I think it's very important to our democracy. So thanks each of you, and I look forward to continuing to work with Barry, Chancellor Scott, and anybody else who wants to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board member comments or questions? Member McDougall.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and more importantly, thank you for your good work on this project. I think when we have a negative rating of 89% on the effectiveness of our government, we have a problem. And this addresses it rather directly. So thank you for doing that. Second, I don't think there is an organization that is better equipped to try to present this throughout the state than the California Community Colleges. Third, the one suggestion I would have, if you, and I'm sure Vice Chancellor Russell has been very helpful in this regard, but given the demands that exist on our colleges, it has to be almost a cookie-cutter approach. Here's what we're trying to do. We'd love to involve you in the process. Here are 5 concrete steps you can take, and I know you've outlined it a lot in that, but here's what you can do as a college to try to do it. And I think if it is simple enough and direct enough and manageable enough, there may just be the leadership that will be at the respective institutions to carry it off. But I think it's a very worthwhile project. I think you've come to the right place, and I'd like to see it move ahead.
Thank you for your advice. Thank you.
Member Azumi.
I also want to give my thanks as well for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I wish the project, all the success in the world. It's greatly needed. Just curious, in addition to the Constitution, the books that you had to decide upon from a huge litany of titles, how did you whittle it down to those particular 4 or 5?
Great question. It was difficult. We had a public nomination process where we received over 300 nominations. So there was a hunger out there, and people have ideas. We took that list and we worked with librarians, including librarian from head librarian Merced College, to further whittle that list down. And then we asked a group of scholars, writers, presenters of public programs to make recommendations, and then we made the final selection of 5. And just so you know, this is the first big initiative of ours, but we intend every year or every 2 years to do this along different themes. It could be justice, it could be education, but my vision is that there are institutions such as community colleges, such as the California Council for the Humanities, California State Libraries, that are learning institutions that are fundamental to our civil society. And in California, we have a difficulty of working together. And I'd like to use this program as a way that we could work together and demonstrate to Californians the strength of each of our institutions and how we can better work together to serve Californians.
Member Ramos.
Ralph, I also want to thank you for coming and echo my colleagues' kudos on your good work. I'm thinking as I'm talking out loud about how important this work is in a kind of historical context. You know, a lot of us who had the benefit of civics education in schools will remember a lot of our history around what was happening in American culture and in this state about 100 years ago at the turn of the last century, when you had civic institutions that were created precisely to integrate a burgeoning population of immigrants, newcomers to American democracy from cultures that had no familiarity with that kind of way of doing business and seeing public problem solving. And we tend to forget, because we don't have civics education in our schools anymore the way that we should, that we were able to overcome as a society tremendous challenges that probably at the time were unprecedented. We had the Depression, we had World War II, we had the Cold War. And I would submit that one of the reasons that as a culture and as a state we were able to weather those storms is because we built a common identity through our understanding of shared bonds around democracy, opportunity, the basic things that it seems that are intrinsic to the kind of educational program you're trying to lift up. And in these times when we face also very daunting problems, terrorism, environmental decay, real diminishment in public discourse and civility, and we have also very, very diverse populations trying to coexist in a very difficult economic environment, it may seem Pollyanna, but I believe firmly, as you seem to, that reintegrating public discussion, focusing on what we share in common as opposed to what divides us, creating fora where people can come together to joint problem solve is probably one of the most important engagements that we can undertake as members of the California Society, members of American society. So I do think that, you know, to close out my thought, the community colleges to me seem like the new settlement houses of today. They seem like the place that is the one catchment area, maybe along with public schools K through 12, where you have an opportunity that we're not seizing sufficiently to really help people understand the commonalities that we share, the history that we share, the opportunities that we can shape together. So to whatever extent that our colleges and our districts can be involved in advancing this work, I think it really does make sense as more than just an academic exercise. I think that we need to reinvigorate our democracy. The Occupy Wall Street movement demonstrates, as much as the Tea Party does, that people are hungry for a place to put their concerns. They're hungry for a place to make America a great society again, feeling that somehow we've lost something. And if this effort can be an important investment in that direction, I, for one, am all for partnering with you in whatever ways that we can to make that happen.
Thank you.
Member Davis-Lyman.
Thank you so much for presenting this short piece to us today. I'd like to ask you, when are you actually going to be putting dates on this so that planning can go on? Because faculty need to know ahead of time as they're getting ready for the fall. Summer would not be a good time to start putting some dates on this and expanding the list. And secondly, I noticed that most of the people on the webinars come from the UC system and one from Stanford. Don't overlook the faculty in the community college system. We have scholars who have written in many of these areas and even expanded. So I'd love it the next time this list comes out that some of our scholars are here and recognized who have published also.
Thank you.
So when do you expect to put the date? When do you think?
So we just found out last week all the communities that through public library systems that are signed up. So I expect in a month's time to have all the dates set out. And I'll work
Okay.
with Barry to target community colleges in those areas, I would say in December and January, so
Okay,
that we
thank
have
you.
plenty of time to plan out how community colleges will be involved.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Ralph.
Thank you very much for your time and all you do.
Okay, we are going to skip to item 3.6. I'm going to ask Matt to come up here. The board will recall that, we talked both last year and this year about providing more opportunity for, those outside our system to present new ideas, new things, be it in the political realm, technology realm, academic realm, whatever it is. And I read an article, I'm going to say it's 5 months ago now, something like that, about a company called Inkling.com, who had kind of revolutionized the way content is presented and delivered. And I was so taken with the article that I actually flew up to San Francisco to meet with the president of the company. And I was so taken with what they were doing that I said, here is one of the answers to engagement of students. And so I wanted to invite Matt to come up just for a short time to share it with you all and the colleges that are listening and watching today. I think it's part of our role as the Board of Governors, again, to present new ideas and new things and to provide options. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt McGinnis, who's the president of Inkling.com.
Thanks, President Himmelstein. Thank you all for hearing me out. I'll keep it a fun 20 minutes, I promise. Bippity-boppity. It's fun coming in from a startup where, as a team that just 2 years ago was me on my sofa and today is a little over 80 people in downtown San Francisco, to come into a very different environment. We fly by the seat of our pants a little more than I think you guys do, although perhaps that's not true. Inkling, just by way of introduction, is a publishing platform for iPad today, although we are not going to be constrained to iPad forever. And I want to tell you a bit of a personal story about what got me to do what I'm doing for a living today, firmly rooted in the world of education and some of the frustrations I experienced through my time as a student and then in my career at Apple. Inkling is reinventing the textbook. We're looking far, far beyond what the print book can do and looking for solutions from a technology perspective that can not only lower costs for students, but also open new doors and, from our perspective, really level the playing field from a socioeconomic perspective and from a learning capacity perspective. The book favors a very particular kind of learner, and there's a whole new world of opportunity with respect to these technologies for people who don't necessarily learn well by reading abstract text. It's a whole world of folks, and some of those people are in California's community college system. Now, I said that this was sort of a personal story. For me, everything is a story. At least in hindsight, it's very easy to weave one, but I think this one's pretty accurate. I sat on a school bus at the age of 8 years old. I'm Canadian, so I was in a very rural community in northeastern Canada, lots of snow, lots of igloos, lots of moose. And we were on the bus, and I was sitting next to a friend named Nick. And Nick was also 8, and we had just been given our spellers, the little books that are sized for hands the size of an 8-year-old to learn how to spell words. And I remember very distinctly turning to Nick and saying, "Hey, we're big kids now," because we had finally been given our first textbooks. And the grin on his face, I got the sort of long end of the stick, maybe. I went through school. I was very well versed in learning from books. I learned how to learn from books, and I got to go to Harvard and get a world-class education and come out and go work for Apple. And when I worked for Apple, I sat in the back of a lot of classrooms, both K-12 and higher education, where I saw the misuse of technology to a level that kind of blew my mind. We would work with rich schools, poor schools, big schools, little schools to deploy thousands of laptops into the hands of students. This was before there was an iPad. And we would spend $1,200 a head to get this device in front of the students, and then the teacher would say, turn to page 376. And it broke my heart because there was so much potential in that technology, but it wasn't being used because there was no obvious way to compete with the familiar, to compete with the familiarity of the textbook that's been in our educational system for so long, and with good reason. The book is a very, very powerful device. Arguably, the book is the single most powerful information technology device humanity has ever known. And it's been so widely distributed that we now build entire institutions around them. We build libraries, concrete buildings in which to house our books. And we design curricula around books. Teachers look at the book, they look at the flow that's been prescribed by an author or an editorial team at Pearson or McGraw-Hill, and they build a course around what's available to them in the book. All of this makes good sense. The book is very durable. It's generally inexpensive, save for most textbooks. You can put a book up on a shelf for 100 years, and when you come back to it, it'll do exactly what it was supposed to do 100 years prior. You don't get a blue screen of death or forget your password with a book. But the book has a ton of fundamental limitations. It's static, it can't respond to the user, and it constrains a learner to a very specific style of learning that dates back quite a while. This is the anatomy lecture of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. It's a Rembrandt painting from 1632. And you can see that this is before the age of the textbook, but it is a bunch of males standing around. I like to say he's doing a live demo. He's got his cadaver out and doing an anatomy lecture. And this oral tradition, this method of education has been with us since as long as people have been communicating orally. Nowadays, of course, nobody ever gets up in front of a group and just talks, right? That's just kidding. Cue the laughter. That's what I'm doing right now. Along came this little technology innovation called the printing press. And the printing press was originally used for the classics. It was used with the Gutenberg Bible. And over time, one of the fundamental prerequisites to using printed materials was met by a huge portion of Western society: literacy. People learned how to read. And when they learned how to read, they could use the book as this remarkable technology device to access knowledge without the presence of another human being. You didn't have to be at Dr. Nicholas Tulp's anatomy lecture in order to learn anatomy. You could look at a book. And this fundamentally shifted the way that human beings learned and has been the basis of the way people learn all the way through to today. That was many hundreds of years ago. And then along came this. Anybody ever use one of these?
Yeah.
A few of you? Okay, good. It was a pretty popular machine in its day. First portable computer. It had a handle on top. You know, the computer, electricity, the internet. When I look back at the printing press, it's hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years from now, people will look back at our period in time and say, electricity and computers happened around the same time. The world prior to electricity and the world after the internet as we know it today will have been a very fine point in time. So what does this all mean? Well, the first thing it means is that we're at the very, very cusp of taking advantage of technology for learning. But when you think about the textbook as a fundamental tool in the classroom today, it's apparent that we have not made great strides in this respect. We're still using what is fundamentally the same tool that they were using 200 years ago to learn and to teach. So it begs the question, where do we go from here? What's next? What is it that we're going to use that's going to be so much better and so obviously better than a textbook that we're actually going to stop buying them? Well, for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is a textbook. Textbooks are actually really remarkable devices. They're finely honed over the course of hundreds of years to do precisely one thing, which is to help someone learn something. It's distinct from a Danielle Steele novel, which is formulated for something quite different. But books that try to assemble knowledge in print, well, there's a whole bunch of different categories of this kind of book. One of them you probably wouldn't spend money on anymore. It's the encyclopedia. The encyclopedia had traveling salespeople who used to go door to door to sell you these really expensive books. It's absurd to think that you would have a traveling sales team to sell books. And yet, when you think about the current state of the textbook industry, that's sort of where we are. The textbook is absolutely going the way of the encyclopedia. Publishers know it. We know it. The question is, why hasn't it happened yet? Well, this is a book, and it is a canvas. Just like the wall behind you with this beautiful mural is a canvas, just like a postcard is a canvas. And on that canvas, you can create anything. You can put information on it as you see fit. This is one kind of canvas with a certain set of constraints and limitations. This is a fundamentally different canvas. And if you take a book and throw it onto this canvas, you've kind of got a Frankenstein, because it doesn't take advantage of any of the capabilities of this new canvas, but is fully constrained by its limitations. Limitations like a $499 minimum price point. Limitations like if you drop it, it breaks, unlike a book. So there are a lot of ways in which throwing a book onto an iPad is absolutely the wrong approach, and it's something that we think we need to quickly leapfrog. You have to treat these two canvases as fundamentally different, and that's one of the problems that we're tackling with Inkling. There have been lots of sort of miscommunications and forays along the journey to the digital textbook, this being a bit of a hiccup, because digital devices are capable of so much more and of appealing to such a broad array of learners that to simply copy the textbook into the world of the digital would be to fundamentally miss the opportunity at hand. Lucky for us, the human brain is a really, really powerful device. It adapts, and when you put something under the nose of someone, they will find a way to make the most of it. We discovered fire, we invented the book, we invented the iPad, and there are plenty of opportunities to go beyond what we do today. Now, we learned to learn from books. Each of us, in our own way, learned how to learn from books. And there's a backhanded compliment for people who learned how to learn from books, but aren't necessarily good at anything else. Anybody know what that backhanded compliment is? Oh, he did well in his exam? Well, he's just book smart. Book smart is a way to describe somebody who learned how to learn from books really well, but didn't necessarily learn how to be a salesperson or learn how to make friends. Book smart is a difficult word, and I think that when we rearrange the notion of learning content altogether, you can get to a point where the term book smart isn't needed anymore. We don't also need the other term for someone who didn't do so well on their exams but is a great salesperson. Street smart. There's a word for people who are both book smart and street smart. It's smart. We don't necessarily use this as a brand word, but we believe in the concept of a smart book. And a smart book has three big characteristics in my mind. First, a smart book is interactive. It means that when you touch it, it responds to you. It somehow provides an experience to you based on what you're doing with it. Second, it's dynamic. It means that if you're somebody who enjoys viewing video, listening to audio, exploring rich primary information in your history course, that for you, the experience is you. And for someone who really enjoys the prose of a well-written novel inside of a history book, then for you, that experience is you. Dynamism in the learning experience, we know personalization is absolutely core to preserving engagement in learning, and engagement is what ultimately reduces dropout rates and increases performance. And finally, everything we do as human beings is social, except for sitting in a library staring at a book. It's a horribly isolating experience to read a textbook. Why not have your community, your professor, your students, all of the learning resources and people in your learning community at your disposal right inside your learning content? So these are the things that we aspire to with Inkling, and I want to show you really quickly what Inkling looks like on an iPad. So when you open up Inkling, you're brought to a menu of all the content that you have available to you in your library. And I'm going to show you just a few quick titles to illustrate what's possible, not tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, but what students have access to today. I'll show you first a science title. This is a best-selling biology title from McGraw-Hill. And when you come into Inkling, you have this scrolling column of all the content available to you in that title on the left-hand side. And then when you choose a title, or a chapter rather, it shows you a summary of all of the information available to you in that chapter on the right. Now, we don't use pages in Inkling because it's not a book. So when I come into a card, everything about blood and blood components in this case is right here in this one scrolling column Whenever there's a term that needs to be defined, I can tap on it and instantly get a definition straight from the glossary. And when I see an image that I want to drill down on, I can simply tap that image and zoom in and see a nice high-resolution piece of artwork. Now, in this case, the student is learning about how oxygen bonds to the iron atom at the center of this lattice structure. And that's a useful way to look at it. But I can also simply render out heme in 3D. So when I tap, now I have a beautiful 3D rendering of the heme molecule, which I can spin and zoom and explore to understand the relationship between structure and function. Now, I can jump out to a different biology textbook, Campbell Biology. This is the #1 selling textbook, I think, ever in any subject matter on Earth. And if I jump into concept 6.3, in this case studying the cell, you can see that I can now visually drill down into information. So here I've got the cell and the nucleus. If I tap on the nucleus, it zooms up and shows me a diagram. I can come down and see the nuclear pore. And if I want, I can even zoom down and see an electron micrograph of the surface of that object. And I can see that this is actually a complex hierarchy of images that I can freely explore just by tapping. For a student who has to learn the labels, they can tap this button in the top left corner, strip off the labels, and come in and quiz themselves. When we put this in front of students, they're instantly engrossed in the content and excited at the opportunity to learn this way, rather than simply staring at it on a piece of paper. Now, I'm going to skip to something a little bit different. Here is a history book. This is American history. And I'm going to skip to chapter 23 on the United States and the Cold War. And you can see as I scroll that there's tons of media available to the student here. If I come down to the section on the anti-communist crusade, I can scroll through and I see a high-resolution image that I can tap and zoom here. People are getting irradiated by a nuclear bomb. They just don't know it yet. It's actually really depressing when you read this chapter about the stuff that the U.S. government conducted during the 1940s and 50s. This book actually is so engaging that we had a reading club within the company, and we did a chapter for everybody, and it turns out that half the company ended up reading about half of this entire history book, which was a nice data point for a bunch of folks that are actually engineers. We actually taught them something other than computers for once. If I jump over into these bookmarks on the side, these are bookmarks that I can share with my friends or with my professor. If I want to listen to Winston Churchill's speech, I can simply hit Listen Now, and it instantly begins to play Winston Churchill.
About the present position in Europe.
The media that we can bake into these titles is really remarkable. Music appreciation titles have staff notation that the student can follow along with. The history books always have video and audio of first-hand accounts of all of these events. And you can see even coming into, the prior presenter was talking a little bit about exploring America through its Constitution. I'm not going to go out into the constitutional section of this title, but you'll see that all of this primary media, being able to come in and actually see acts of Congress with the live signatures on those documents, brings history to life in a way that a textbook never could. History, biology, music, you name it, all of these titles are in the process of being built for Inkling, and in a way that doesn't just replicate the book experience, but really brings it to life in a way that the physical book never could. So I'd love to sit here and bludgeon you with demos for 30 minutes because it's pretty compelling stuff, but I hope that gives you a sense of the sort of work that we're doing. So where are we today as a company, and what does this look like in terms of classroom use? Inkling today is actively in use at a little over 60 institutions, having launched the product just a year ago. So we're looking forward to a very exciting 2012 and 2013 as our library expands and as institutions become aware of these possibilities. You know, there's a few interesting things about what attracts people to Inkling. One being that everything in Inkling is certainly a lot cheaper than the print book. It's usually 30 to 40% cheaper than buying a new print book. But more importantly, everything in Inkling is available by the chapter. What that means is if a professor assigns 15 out of the 60 chapters that you saw in that biology textbook, at $2.99 a chapter, the student pays $45 over the course of the entire semester rather than paying $200 in September. And this modularity in the content structure is just step one of many, many steps that we seek to implement in putting control over who spends what when back into the hands of the professor and the student, rather than having it be according to this sort of traditional adoption model where billions of dollars are spent every year on things that people ostensibly do not want. So my recommendations to you as you think about how to capture this opportunity in time, number one, we think that when faculty begin to think beyond the textbook and start looking at digital media as a core asset in the learning process, that we're going to have the leverage with publishers to design programs that are more flexible and cost effective. Number two, you guys have millions and millions of students in your system. You have leverage. You have so much more leverage than me and my 80 employees in downtown San Francisco. What you decide to do with the dollars that you have is going to influence the way that these products are developed and the way that the big power brokers in this industry respond to folks like us. Number three, pilot things. Pilot, pilot, pilot. The more you get these sorts of technologies into the hands of faculty and students, the more people's eyes are going to be open to the opportunity. And we're committed to working with you and any institution in the state that wants to work with us to implement even small-scale programs to show that there's a future for this kind of learning technology. And finally, when you make technology a key component of your strategy for growing the system over the course of the next 3-5 years, use that technology to gain economies of scale in your cost structure that allows you to phase out some of these antiquated, expensive print materials from the entire program. Because you might have to spend $500 up front for an iPad as a student, but if it's saving you $1,000 over the course of 2 years, there's real benefit there. As I said, we're not totally iPad. We're doing iPads today, but anybody with a web browser will be able to access this technology in the first half of next year and certainly before the back-to-school season in 2012. I'm sure you're all avid Twitter users, and if you are, I heard somebody, was it Vice President Perez in the audience saying something about Twitter? If you are on Twitter and you want to sort of keep up to date on what we're doing, that's our handle, and we tweet regularly about what we're developing. So thank you so much for all of the work that you guys do for the state. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Yeah. Board members? Vice President Perez.
What a great app. I'm actually downloading it as you speak.
Good.
But, I love it because it's innovative, and more importantly, I love the point that you made about students can actually access chapter by chapter. I just remember so oftentimes buying books and only reading a select few of chapters,
Right.
but then I had this huge book, and when I returned it to the bookstore, I don't think I got nearly my return on that investment.
There's
So-
definitely a disconnect between what people expect to be paid for a secondhand book and what
Exactly.
they get. Yeah.
But how are books made available on this? Is it up to the authors? Is it up to the book manufacturers? I mean, how do you have access to these books to actually be available here?
Right. So we work with all of the major publishers in the U.S. to bring their content to the platform. Part of these titles are produced in downtown San Francisco, where we disassemble them and then reassemble them for iPad with all of the media that's available to us. And other times we sort of automate the process. It depends on the title. But we do source the material today from the major publishers. That, too, will be something that broadens over time. We're looking forward to actually allowing faculty to bring their own content and resources to the platform as a distribution mechanism directly to their students.
That was my second question. How receptive has faculty been to utilizing this?
This is the sort of thing where I can do I can spend $1 million on cool web materials and stuff, and yeah, faculty can spend an hour with that and not really appreciate the potential. But if I can spend 5 minutes with a faculty member and show it to them firsthand, it's night and day. So for us, when a faculty member sees what we have, it's love at first sight. They understand the potential with their students. I didn't show you guys the capacity of the platform for the faculty member to communicate directly with his or her students inside the title. But when students annotate and comment and have conversations in the content, faculty can then respond. And likewise, students can communicate with one another inside the content. So it brings a whole new level of value. Seton Hill, a small college on the East Coast, mandates that students come in and communicate, and the professors leave breadcrumb trails of interesting information inside the book for their students. You bet your top dollar those students are in there every Sunday night making sure that they see what the prof had to say. We work pretty closely with all the faculty who are sort of early adopters, although today now there's a pretty good support network, faculty to faculty, for getting to know how to use the platform.
Member McDougall.
You may have answered the first question I had by your response, but I was wondering if you work at all with campus bookstores, just from the standpoint of an interface, an infrastructure that exists on the campus. You can only visit the campus so often, et cetera. But once faculty get exposed to it and get some understanding, is there any relationship that you might have with bookstores? That's question number one, and whether you see that as a bad road to go down or whatever. I'd be interested in your thought. Question number two is, I noticed you had a community college on that list of institutions, Broward Community College. I'd be particularly interested in any evaluative material you might have gotten back from them about how they felt it worked. And then the third and final question is, your technology, at this point at least, limited only to textbooks and delivering of instruction? Do you have, for example, anything in the student services area that allows a student to engage in academic self-planning and things such as that that would be helpful, or is it strictly textbook? Those.
So we have bookstores, Broward, and student services. So bookstores. We do engage with bookstores today. There are tricky waters to navigate in higher education, as I'm sure you know, with respect to kickbacks that publishers and operators of private bookstores give to institutions. And sometimes that becomes a problem for us because there's say an exclusive contract between a bookstore operator and a campus for the distribution of textbooks, and then we just say, well, we're not a textbook, but you can debate that until you're blue in the face. The short answer is yes, we work with bookstores. The long answer has a lot to do with the future of the distribution of this content and whether this goes through the IT department of the bookstore and yada, yada, yada. But we keep an open mind with respect to that piece of it today. With respect to the community college, I'm not familiar with their use case specifically. I can speak to one case that is at least peripherally related, which is our first actual results-focused study. The Virginia Department of Education deployed Inkling into the hands of senior year AP students and gave half of the students an iPad with Inkling and half of the students the print copy of the related title. Both cohorts improved their AP scores year over year from the prior cohort, but the Inkling students improved 50% more than the students with the print book. So that's encouraging. Other data points around user satisfaction are encouraging, but we intend to spend a few years doing something a lot more rigorous and with proper controls to see how this affects learning outcomes. With respect to student services, today we really do consider ourselves to be a publishing platform, although I didn't show you all of the assessment tools that are built into the platform. So students come in, when they get something wrong, they're given feedback specific to that incorrect response. They're given data about how they've been performing themselves, and next year they'll be given data relative to their cohort, so they'll know where they stand with globally the users of the book, as well as people around them that they know on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. So give them sort of self-evaluation data, but that's purely academic, not so much student services in perhaps the context that you raised the question.
Is there any plan to go into, or are you going to stay right in the textbook area?
I don't know, and I'd probably need to better understand the scope of student services as you've defined it.
Okay. Member Malamud, then Member Baum.
I think you're in Turkey. Do you know? Because I went to a science high school, and they were using a product exactly like this. And it was a big old wow. The professor was at the front of the room, and he had all these tools. And he could move things and expand things, and it was very impressive. So I'm glad to hear that it's here.
I didn't know what I think you're in Turkey meant, and I thought I was about
Turkey.
to get a tongue lashing.
Serious. No, the country of Turkey. I was there a year ago.
Oh, you think we're in Turkey?
Yes.
Turkey, the country.
They have.
Okay.
They gather up their best students in science and math and put them in a high school where they live. And we toured it, and they had things like this. So I suspect you are.
We do. It's really interesting. We do about. How public is this forum?
Very.
Very.
It's
Okay.
live-cast.
We do a very substantial portion of our revenue internationally, and that's been a big surprise to us. Australia, the Middle East. Actually, one Middle Eastern country was yesterday the third largest country to transact with us. So it's very interesting to see how these technologies are being used abroad. And there was a really interesting, Fareed Zakaria did a very interesting study on the state of American education last night on CNN and talked about how American schools versus international. So I mean, I worked for Apple in China for 2.5 years and sat in the back of a lot of Chinese classrooms, and I can tell you it's no utopia there either. But with respect to technology adoption, they have been much more aggressive, and that's been an interesting point for us, just from a business perspective, to see how Turkey, whether it be the clucking turkey that I thought I was a second ago, or the country, seems to have the leg up.
No, and I remember having a bit of a sinking feeling because I was like, oh my gosh, look how great this is. So I'm hopeful you'll go everywhere. It was a wonderful thing.
Last comment, Member Baum.
Just thanks for a great presentation, and it's a related comment, not directly related to education, but you plan to roll this out also with partners in other forms of publishing, whether it's trade, newspapers, magazines, because those are industries that are suffering right now.
Right. So newspapers and magazines. So actually, if you think about Inkling on the spectrum of the shelf life of a given publication, from a blog to a tweet, which is the shortest lived publication, to a newspaper, which is about a day long, to a magazine, which can be a weekly or a monthly magazine. And then you get into annuals and out into titles that sit on the shelf for years. Now, textbooks used to sit on the shelves, be viable work products for 5 years. Now they're viable work products for 2 years, not because we need to update Einstein's theory, but because we need to rearrange the page numbers or update. Sometimes it's legitimate, so I shouldn't say terrible things, but other times it's more of an economic interest. For us, we're focused on a platform that supports content that deserves the treatment required of content that has a long shelf life. So the short answer to your question is, we have a really cool cocktails book on the platform. If you want to make a Manhattan, they'll still be making Manhattans 50 years from now. And so trade is an interesting area for us, but honestly, our core focus is on reinventing learning content in an institutional context. And so you'll see that product features and content direction will really focus on making the life of the faculty member not just easier, but making the faculty member more effective as an educator in the classroom.
Yeah. Second last word, Member Davis.
Thank you for being here. This is extremely exciting. And the piece that I want to know more about, and maybe you can send me where it is on your site, is I want to see that research. You mentioned one, but I really would like to see that. So
I'll send you more than just that. I'll send you sort of a compilation of, and if you want, President Himmelstein, I can send to you, and maybe you can distribute to the board.
That would be great.
Some literature on this topic. I mean, as I said earlier, it's early days. The product is a little over a year old, so there's plenty to learn. But we'll show you that the early returns are positive. Okay.
Okay, Matt. Thank you very much. Very good presentation. I just thought, this is something. In interest of full disclosure, I have no investments, no tie to Inkling whatsoever. I literally just read about this in a magazine and said, this sounds great. Yeah. So I wanted to expose all of us to it. And I would ask, Matt, since there does seem to be some interest here, that keep us in the loop on how you're doing. I think we'd be particularly interested if there are any things on the docket are going to happen with community colleges here or elsewhere.
And I think on the flip side, what we'd like to do is make sure that if there are, either in this room or in the sites that are simulcast, parties who are interested in working with us, even in an academic context where we do get to measure results, for us, those early established beachheads within the institutions is critical. So we're eager to partner and work with the system.
Great. Thank you. Okay. We actually have one public comment on this, I guess. Okay.
So Kevin Feliciano, Student Senate, California Community Colleges.
So continuing on with my trend of making comments on things, This is exciting. I think it's great, and it's definitely one of those resources that students could definitely buy into. There are, like I said, it's one of many resources. We do have stuff like OER and open source textbooks and stuff like that. Anything to keep the cost down for students, I think, is great. For me, I'm a very visual learner, so the fact that I could tap on things and it'll take me somewhere else is great. Though I may not support particular platforms or whatever, I think anything that we can do as a system to help introduce technology to help improve student success by way of if a student doesn't have to spend as much money on a textbook, they can spend that money on housing or food, the better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to our last item here, an update on the Compton Community College District, item 3.5. Thank you, Tom Henry, for your patience, and I will turn it over to the Chancellor.
Well, I know that you have been very interested as a board in Compton College. Compton College is that college which had the unfortunate distinction of losing its accreditation, which was the only public community college in California to so do in my history. I was involved in the assembly bill that was able to give a $30 million loan authored by Mervyn Dimely, and I carried the bill then when it came to the Senate. So when I came to this job, because the Chancellor's Office had responsibility for the community colleges, I then had to get involved, and I got rather deeply involved in the past few months, and we made a change in the special trustee, which is the responsibility of the Chancellor, and we were fortunate to get the services of Tom Henry. Tom Henry has some history. He had served as a special trustee in that district. He can tell you the exact dates. I can't. But I've been extremely pleased with the kind of leadership that he's given there. And I know I tried to keep the board informed, but I thought the best way to keep the board informed was to actually bring Tom Henry here. And here's someone who's, I have visited the campus myself, not only the time that we as a board were at El Camino College and went over there, but I also was there on occasion to speak to a community gathering. And I was intending to go down to Compton College and was scheduled to go down there, and then I mentioned to you before that I suddenly was called to jury duty. So I'm going to go down there sometime, but I keep getting really encouraging reports from Tom, and he's given you some materials, but I thought it would be great to have him here, let him give you a report, and then answer any questions you may have. So, Tom, it's yours.
Thank you, Chancellor Scott. President Himmelstein, members of the board, appreciate the opportunity. I did provide the board in advance two prepared documents. The first document is actually just a monthly newsletter that the CEO, Dr. Curry, provides to the educational community. I thought I'd give you a flavor of how he's engaging with the elected officials as well as the community at large. I first met Dr. Keith Curry when I was there, assigned by this board back in 2006. He was the Dean of Student Services, bright young man, actually in the doctoral program at UC Irvine at the time, and would like to share with you that he just received his doctorate from UC Irvine. So I think they're very fortunate to have him. Just very strong leadership. As his newsletter depicts, he is engaged with the community as well as elected officials. I trust him implicitly. I worked in the trench with him back in 2006. He was one of the first individuals I'd see there in the morning, one of the last to leave. Focuses on student success, and I just think he's going to provide strong leadership over the long haul there. I'd be remiss if I didn't share my appreciation with the board relative to the strong leadership of Chancellor Scott, Vice Chancellor Eric Skinner, and Assistant Vice Chancellor Fred Harris. I network with them. I hear from them weekly. During my first month and a half there, I heard from the chancellor often, even though he was engaged with the jury duty. That's so reassuring to folks in the field, in particular when you're assigned, away from your home and difficult work. And again, appreciate the leadership that Chancellor Scott is providing. They pick up the phone, somebody answers the phone. If they don't, I get a call back immediately. So wanted to share my appreciation relative to that. The second document, I thought that it would be helpful for the board, especially perhaps the new board members have been appointed since my last appointment as special trustee, to give you a historical perspective of state intervention in terms of the progressiveness of that. And so I went back, looked in the files there at Compton, looked at my own personal files, and give you a sense of the state intervention, starting with Dr. Tyler, whose focus, obviously then, and the institution was accredited at that time, was fiscal stability. Obviously, subsequent to that, they needed the emergency loan, so it was very serious, the whole fiscal stability issue, and then integrity issues that he was dealing with there. During that time, Chancellor Drummond issued the second executive order there that I referenced, and the governing board's powers and duties were suspended through that executive order. You probably are aware that that particular order was challenged in Superior Court, and the state prevailed, and then subsequently AB 318 codified that section about the board being removed from the dais and losing their legal rights, powers, and duties, and then a state trustee assuming those legal rights, powers, and duties. There's been a series of trustees, and I would submit to you, including myself, they come with different strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's important for the state to be able to handpick a particular trustee at a point in time that those skill levels are needed at that particular point in time. There are some constants relative to all of those that are engaged, and I believe that one constant is the state, obviously. One constant is the accrediting agency, ACCJC. A constant is the district. Compton Community College District is a legal entity. Compton College did disappear, but not the district. It's a legal entity. The partnership, in my opinion, and I guess if we needed any evidence, the last month was last month or two, is clear indication they're a constant. In my opinion, the partnership is a constant, and that particular partner is a constant that is very formidable once you start to examine the steps that are required relative to getting a new partner. And we've had a number of conversations about this, the Chancellor, myself, and others. Surely there would be an entity that would raise their hand, would want to be the partnership, be the partner. I'm not sure they realize how formidable that relationship is or how difficult. But the more troubling factor is ACCJC, the Department of Education, what is required. And we were clearly informed through a letter that the partnering district, in this case El Camino, if they would have continued with their termination letter, would have had to do what's called a teach-out. And by the way, that teach-out could have occurred at the El Camino Community College District. They would have had to submit a closure report relative to the center. In my opinion, that would have practically eliminated all the good work that's gone on down there, and there's been significant good work that's happened since 2006 relative to keeping the doors open, providing a quality education for the students of that community and adjoining communities. And the more we analyze that, the more we realize that it is important to keep the constant partnership. Obviously, if there's differences agreement, and that's one of my charges, the Chancellor has given me to revisit the original MOU, if you will, or the agreement between the Compton Community College District and the partnering district that, quite frankly, there are some sections that are flawed. It was the best we had at the time when we put it together, but we'll take some time to sit down with President Fallow, ourselves, the staff here. We'll go through and revise that, make it more meaningful in terms of where we are in the current continuum of recovery. You will note under my section here that I have a focus relative to the maintaining a constant vigilance relative to an independent accredited college. But what I've told the community in Compton, as well as the faculty and staff, that my first priority, and I need to share it with you as well, is to keep the doors open. It was my first priority in 2006 through Chancellor Drummond to find a means to keep the doors open for students, faculty, in the community of Compton. My second priority, and it's an important one, is to move forward to an independent accredited college. However, I'm not going to allow the second priority to jeopardize the first priority. And quite frankly, I think in the last 6 months or so, there was a lack of focus relative to that first priority, and we were in great jeopardy of the doors closing. When I referenced a new partner, if we ever got to that point, I think the doors would close for a year to 2 years relative to that process. So it was critical to me. I've been vested there. I spent 10 years or so at Compton Community College District when Randy Ward was a state administrator, and I was a CEO for the state's fiscal crisis and management assistance team. So I've vested in Compton, have great friends there, a lot of respect, and felt that we needed to maintain that partnership. Obviously, I will focus in my time in the next month or so to revise that MOU, the agreement between the two entities, and then move forward. On the second page of the document, I talk about accredited courses, and this fact gets lost, quite frankly, in terms of who is providing the accredited courses. El Camino Community College District is providing accredited courses for the students at the Compton Community College District through the entity known as the Compton Center. And remember, I referenced Compton College disappeared. They lost their accreditation, but the district itself exists. There's been great progress in a number of areas. I just grabbed enrollment. Obviously, there are a lot of student success issues that maybe in subsequent meetings I can share with you. But I wanted to look at the enrollment. For me, when I returned in September, I had not gone back to the district for about a 4-year period. And so I could see tremendous progress in a number of areas that, quite frankly, even the local community hasn't seen the great progress. They see incremental steps, but not necessarily recognizing the amount of growth that's taken place. And for me, it was fairly easy. When I was there in 2006, we got excited about having 6 or so students in a classroom. The enrollment disappeared because of the potential loss of accreditation. I toured Compton Community College District in September, the first week of September. Every single classroom that I went by was filled to capacity. The grounds were groomed well. I did not see any graffiti at all in any of the buildings within the facilities. And the restrooms, quite frankly, were clean, a pleasant odor, and they were supplied. That was not the case back in 2006. And there's a whole litany of things I could share with you. I'm grabbing some key issues that jumped out at me when I was there. Parking lots are filled. They were vacant in 2006. The path to establish an accreditation, there's confusion relative to that as well. And I would submit to you that it's real clear to me now. I've had a number of discussions with Barbara Bino, president of ACCJC, along with others, done my own research relative to the codes. It's very clear to me, and I'm communicating at every chance I get, that in order for us to get to what the community would say the ultimate goal of having an accredited institution under Compton Community College District, it must initially be accredited under El Camino Community College District before we can get to an accredited institution, if we ever get there under Compton Community College District. That timeline is a long timeline, and I'm hesitant to even, every chance I share this, I get asked the question, well, how long, Tom? What is the parameters? And I've thrown out, when I was there, I thought it would be a 12-year process. And when I worked in FICMAT, we learned that as long as it took the entity to get to where they were, and I'm talking now about the fiscal crisis situations, the emergency loan districts, that's about how long recovery is. And so we can start to quantify it. We have a sense now in terms of ACCJC, those timelines. President Fallow has engaged and developed a accreditation steering committee It's broad gauge of faculty and staff and community leaders and others. They're starting to look at the eligibility requirements and the standards in terms of how they move the center to an accredited institution under El Camino Community College District. That's first and foremost. And so I don't spend, quite frankly, a lot of time and discussion relative to what do we need to do to be accredited under Compton Community College District. I want to focus first and foremost on keeping the doors open, because that was in jeopardy. And then second priority is let's get it accredited under El Camino. And then from there, we can start having a discussion relative to the timelines and what it will take to be accredited under the district. I will share with you that I feel that I was welcomed very well within the community. I meet with the board regularly, that is the elected board of Compton Community College District. I meet with the board president often, and we're in communication, whether I'm there or not, via email or cell phone. I've had a number of forums, student, faculty, and staff forums since I've been there. I've met with a number of the elected officials and will continue to do that. And I would say that they have welcomed me very well, and I've felt that it's been a genuine and feel really good about the progress we've made in a short amount of time. You'll see that under my current focus, obviously fiscal stability remains. One of the issues that President Fallow had was he could not approve the budget, and he submitted his termination letter. He had concerns relative to the beginning balance and the expenditures that were going on. We have since addressed that. The budget has been adopted and approved. President Fallow has rescinded the termination letter. I meet with him regularly as well. I am establishing what was required into AB 318, Dimley's bill, that did not ever formally get established. When I was there, I had set up and interviewed, it must have been 20 or 30 names that I got from the president of the university at the time. Some remember Dimley himself, others. I think they may have met once or twice under a subsequent trustee, and then it was disbanded. There's no question about one, it's a legal requirement, statutory requirement. We do have to have the Special Trustee Advisory Committee. We will form that. I'll probably have representation from the elected board on that and the other communities that feed into the district itself. And then the Proposition 39 Bond Oversight Committee, a lot of questions relative to how those bond monies are being used. The committee was never formed. If it was formed, it never met regularly. So we have now on the website other means of communication to the community, the various communities, Carson, Paramount, Long Beach, Compton itself, suggesting and encouraging applications for those two committees. And so I feel strongly and confident that we'll have those formed, and they'll be meeting as the law requires. I will be, and I had intended to do it for this meeting, just apologize, didn't get it done. I'll be formally looking at the bond funds. There was a $100 million bond fund, and I'm going to examine the expenditures relative to the bond measure. I'll be memorializing what I found relative to that, and we'll be sharing it with the educational community. I'll be looking at the AB 318 line of credit. There was a $30 million line of credit. I think that they've expended $17 million of that. A lot of misinformation there as well. Some folks think that it's all been spent. It hasn't. Purposely, kind of the brakes have been put on. We're trying to live within the district's budget itself, and being able to do that because of the enrollment. The expenditures were already there, and the enrollment went from here to here. So they are being able to manage better fiscally. And then I'll focus on the partnership agreement. I'd like to reassure the Board of Governors that the Chancellor is indeed providing strong leadership. I feel very comfortable. I really appreciate the constant, he picks up the phone, how's it going? Tom, do you need anything? My staff's available. And in fact, true to his word, they are. When I call them, they're there, and they're very helpful. I'm building, along with other colleagues, a strong relationship with the state, ACCJC, the partnering district, the Compton community itself. And I can assure you that the focus for Dr. Curry and myself, the faculty and staff, is on students and student success. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Chancellor, and then we'll go to board member comments.
Okay. Thank you for that good report, Tom. I one time told Tom Henry he was kind of the Red Adair of California community colleges because he's gone to a lot of places where the fire was blazing and has put it out. It happened at Lassen College, which is now on the right road. It happened at Solano, which was on show cause, actually, and now they're completely removed from any sanction. And so I think he's the right man at the right time. I've been extremely pleased by the reception that he's gotten in the community. Frankly, prior to his arrival, there was a lot of distress with the Compton faculty and staff threatening a vote of no confidence and things of that nature. And I'm really pleased that that sort of turmoil has cooled down. And he's gone into the community. And, you know, you can't please everybody because when the accreditation was taken away from Compton Community College, and then some of the other things that happened there, they had to be bankrupt. A lot of the people in the community didn't understand that. They couldn't understand that. What happened to our college? How come it was taken away? Well, you went broke. That's what happened. And unfortunately, the Board of Trustees did not exercise good judgment. In fact, unfortunately, one of the members of the Board of Trustees actually had embezzled $1 million, and of course, he's spending his time in prison right now. But they're just, and whenever a state, whether it happens in K-12 or community colleges, if you go bankrupt and the state gives you a loan, they no longer are going to let that Board of Trustees continue to have financial control because they already proved that they were inept in terms of handling the funds that they had. So a special trustee is required. And I am just so pleased that Tom Henry stepped up and said that I'm willing to do it. And fortunately, the relationship now between the Compton Center and El Camino College has been reestablished as on really a good, straight, steady place. So he talks about what I've done. All I've done is just got on the phone and said, when he tells me what he's doing, I just say, well, just keep doing that. That sounds right. So it hadn't been very hard for me to get on the phone. I'm pretty good at delegating, particularly if somebody's performing very well. I don't get in their way. I just step back and say, we'll keep doing it. That sounds like the right thing. And I've gotten a lot of good reports. So thank you, Tom, for stepping in and doing this. And I know this board has been, some of them were here maybe way back in 2006 when all of this started happening. But we're going to open it up to the board members and let them ask Tom questions. But I just have to express my sincere appreciation for the job that he's done thus far.
Member Reed.
I would like you just to share just a moment with the board regarding the issue of the library and where it stands.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Member Reed. Appreciate that question or comment. I shared with Member Reed prior to the meeting that he asked me about the LRC, and to be honest with you, in 2006-07, it actually looked better to me than it looks today. But with that said, there's litigation. There was litigation. The district prevailed relative to the litigation. One of the contractors, in terms of the windows that were leaking, and a lot of issues relative to the seams and faulty installation, and district prevailed. So they're utilizing those funds to reinstall new hurricane-proof, earthquake-proof, whatever, ghost-proof. They're installing new windows, bigger and better, and that's taking place. That's taking place today. And I also shared that I'm nervous about it because the winter coming on, and I asked the question about when they anticipated it being completed and even occupied, and everybody always has a date, and I had to smile because I said, that's the same month you told me 4 years ago. And so I'm pressuring. I'm putting some real pressure on getting the windows in. They're doing as we speak, trying to get additional crews. Once that occurs, then they can go back inside. There's some issues inside relative to the heating and air conditioning system, and some electrical issues. a number of mistakes were made. I'll just say that. And when Chancellor Drummond and I initially toured the building, and I didn't have a lot of background relative to architectural issues, but to me, just an administrator, I made a list of a half a dozen things that were pretty serious things that all have been corrected, but you wonder why there were so many mistakes made over time relative to that particular building. But I'm optimistic. President Curry is optimistic. We're on the contractors and the project managers daily, and I'm not going to give you a time period because that thing keeps moving. But we're optimistic that we will be able to occupy it, and we will have corrected those issues that have been under question for so long.
Other board member questions or comments? Member Ramos.
Member Ramos.
Thank you for that illuminating report. This is a matter that I'm just catching up with because I'm a newer member of this board. But I just want to ask a couple of clarifying questions. This has been going on for about 7 years by my count, looking at your record. And you mentioned something about a timeline of about 12 years. Could you clarify that remark? Is that something that's based on your prior experiences in other communities, or is that something that is based on some other experience you can reference, or is that based on your assessment of what's happening in Compton?
Well, initially, yes to all those questions.
Okay.
But initially, when I first was appointed, remember that they just lost accreditation.
Correct.
And I started to ask individuals at the accrediting agency, what does this really mean? Well, what it really meant was that Compton College disappeared, so they lost accreditation. And I was charged with two main functions, either keeping the doors open, which we were able to do, or closing the doors and determining assets and liabilities. We kept the doors open, but we kept them open under a very unique, never been done in the country, through a partnership agreement. And so we had, as a center, so the doors are open, students are receiving degrees, they're El Camino Community College degrees. Then it begs the question, how do you move a center to an independent community college? And so we know those timelines, and that's about a 6-year process, typically. Mm-hmm. Creating a new, even if you're going to create a new college, you're looking at about a 6-year process. And so that process has started, and we're somewhere along that continuum. But then once that happens, if you're asking the question, how long is it before it could potentially be a independently accredited institution under Compton Community College District, I think those timelines would potentially start over or somewhere within that. And so I say, a 10-year, we're looking at probably a 10-year process to get, and that might even be wishful thinking because there's some unknowns there. And why I try to focus on the more important issues. Are students being served in the community? Are they receiving a degree? Can they take basic skill courses? Career tech? Are we transferring students? And the answer to all those questions are yes, certainly. Mm-hmm. And then secondarily to that, the community feels disenfranchised, and they feel disenfranchised because they lost their community college, and so I have always pledged that is a goal. But not before it's time. I'm not going to jeopardize that or this for that. I'm not going to jeopardize the doors being. And so in addition to that, I served a number of years at Compton Community College District that had an emergency loan, and at Oakland Unified School District that had a $100 million emergency loan. And over time, I've quantified the number of years it really took for full recovery. And in each of those 10 to 12-year period, and some a little further. And part of that has to do with how long it took the institution to get there.
Okay. So
let me add something to that. Remember that this body nor the legislature has anything to do with accreditation.
Right.
Accreditation is done by an independent collection of colleges, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. So I guess I have to go ahead and say we're at their mercy. In other words, we can't say we could pass 10 resolutions and it wouldn't make any difference because only the accrediting commission, and they took the draconian step of taking away the accreditation from Compton College. Now, prior to that, Mark Drummond had already gone in and taken over the academics of the college and placed a trustee there.
Right.
But then when they lost their accreditation, that just complicated everything. So we've got an institution that went academically bankrupt and fiscally bankrupt. So that's a pretty tough assignment. We now, fortunately, have a tremendous growth in enrollment. Fortunately, this enrollment pressure that we have throughout the state has probably done something for that. And every one of those students are getting, they are passing an accredited course and they're getting an accredited degree. But it says El Camino, and it is El Camino. And El Camino has stepped in and put their stamp of approval on this, and so that's why the maintenance of that partnership is pretty important.
It's very important.
For butting in, but I just want to clarify that to make sure that everybody understands.
Yeah, let me just clarify my question. I mean, I think that's well taken, and that's what I'm trying to discern. Given the fact that we don't have a lot of control over this process, are we at least doing the essential things that we can do to ensure that it's accelerated to the extent that that's responsible, reasonable, and possible? And I'm not hearing you say that there's anything about this time frame that seems unusual in light of similar circumstances or what has been happening in that community. So now let me get to the second point, which does deal with this question of disenfranchisement from the community. I note here with interest that whether it's by the accrediting agency's requirements or state law, I don't know, but that the Compton Center must first, as you suggest, be accredited under the El Camino Community College District before it can be reaccredited through as an independent, freestanding community college.
Correct.
Okay. So what I want to know about that is what is that a normal procedure? Is that a new procedure based on the fact that this is an unprecedented case?
You, as Board of Governors, did something that has never occurred in the country. In Michigan, there was a community college that lost its accreditation and it shut down. At Compton, they lost their accreditation and the doors stayed open. And so it is new. It's never been done before. We kept the doors open under a partnership agreement through the legislation. And so to me, and there was tremendous confusion early on, and just exists today in some circles, about why can't we just go to ACCJC and get it accredited under. DOE has ruled on that. The Department of Education has communicated to our local ACCJC, the commission, and essentially has said, and in this, it's not like there's a cookbook. It's not like I can just pick up something, or even they can, and say, here's what we did the last time.
Okay, so we're inventing it as we go, and I understand that this is the best we can do. So let me get to the crux of the matter. On the question of community disenfranchisement and their competence in the systems, however you're going to define it, ability to re-engage them, assuming that they proceed according to plan, is there any possibility that we can encourage El Camino Community College District to bring someone from that community onto their board so that there is representation of that community in their own governance process related to that campus? Is there some way that we can otherwise encourage that community to have a vested stake in the discussions and the decisions that are happening related to that community? Because it seems to me that that's a fundamental problem in my book. If I'm a member of that community and decisions are being made by people outside of it, I'm not saying that anything has happened in our process that is inappropriate. On the contrary, I think we're under a bad situation. We're making good progress. But I'm looking at it from the standpoint of some formalized, institutionalized way for that community to have some governance, representation, and influence within the El Camino College dispensation of their problem.
You have it, but you may not like the answer.
Okay.
That representation is your special trustee appointed by this board, because the special trustee is the board. Your special trustee that you've appointed is the board for the community college district. Now, do I meet regularly, and does the board occasionally come to the dais, the elected board? Yes. And the answer to your question, could El Camino have a representative? No, because it's by trustee areas. And I forgot to mention, we're going through the process of a hearing for redistricting in Compton Community College District. Representatives of the Compton Community College District Board attend occasionally the El Camino Community College district
But
board.
they have no formal role. They have no power. They
Not
have no...
in relationship to the center, no.
And
There's no way they can legally do that because there's an El Camino Community College district, and you can't elect somebody over here in another district and have them sit on that board.
Right.
There's no way.
And
that
you
can
don't
happen.
live. You don't live in that district. You don't come from that community.
Me?
Yes.
No, I do not live in. I work in that district.
Okay.
And I do not live in that district. And remember that it gets a little complex. I represent, on behalf of the state, the district, the Compton Community College district, relative to the bonds, the facilities, contracts. It's all spelled out in the legislation and the agreement. El Camino is responsible for the center, the educational product for the students, because Compton lost its accreditation. They can't do that.
Right.
No way of doing that.
And I respect all of that. I guess my concern in closing is that you've mentioned all the stakeholders except the community in terms of who's actually got a hand in shaping the decisions that will be made about that community's community college. And for whatever it's worth, I have a problem with that. I think that's unfortunate. It seems structural. It's not personal. But I wish we could find a better way. Nothing to say that you're doing anything wrong. I just wish we could find a better way to have that community formally involved in a decision that's going to have tremendous implications for its future.
One of the things, it's important that I share this because I agree with what you've said, and we've done a couple things. First of all, Dr. Curry, I don't know if I mentioned this, was reared in Compton. He went to Compton schools. He is the CEO.
That's terrific.
He's the CEO on campus there, well respected. I have engaged a group called the Compton Community Concerned Citizens to Save Compton College. Meet with Marie Hollis, President Hollis, often. She's very supportive of the leadership that we're providing there, supporting of the direction we're going. The last board meeting, I had the student leadership of the campus at the dais. It was marvelous, and the elected members sit in the audience, but was very complimentary of their engagement. I obviously I met with Senator Wright most recently. We'll be meeting with Senator Price and getting their input. And so I am engaged in the community. The community does know me, and I'm engaging them the best we can. And obviously, if you came to a board meeting, you would see that the community is very much engaged. And I'm talking about the Compton Community College District Board meeting, which is monthly, if not more often. Very engaged community.
So they're still meeting. Well, I appreciate what you're doing, and I think we're lucky to have you. I don't want to suggest otherwise. I just wanted to make the point from a policy perspective and a philosophical perspective. I wish we could do better.
Okay, Chancellor.
The only thing I guess I would respond to that, and I understand your concern, they lost their representation by fiscal and academic irresponsibility. I mean, that's in the state will not loan you money and allow you to continue to have the fiscal control. I remember when Vallejo Unified School District went broke. And I was sitting right here in this education committee, and the trustees had been warned by the county superintendent that they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and their superintendent was a kind of a fast operator, and he talked them out of it. So they went broke. And I remember saying this, I did not have any sympathy for that board. I had sympathy for those students. They deserved to continue to have a school in Vallejo, but they didn't deserve any more to run that school because they had run it into the ground. And so that's the way I feel about Compton. We could have closed Compton College, and many of those students, unfortunately, would have never gone to another community college, and that's why we didn't do it. But until they get out of their hole, the state, our hands are tied. They tell us that you've got to run it because we're giving you a $30 million loan, and they've used about $17 or $18 million of that $30 million loan. And until they see a way by which that can be paid off, they're not going to really turn that over to the community. it's a tough deal, but that's the story, and that happens. That's happened in about 3 or 4 K through 12 districts. Vallejo, Oakland, I believe West Fresno. They all went broke, and they all have a special trustee. And slowly, the Oakland district is beginning to have some decision making. But this one was complicated. Those 3, as far as I know, didn't lose their accreditation. This college not only went broke, it lost its accreditation.
Well, Chancellor, let me just clarify, if I may, just a final thought on this. I am not justifying anything that anyone did that was illegal, immoral, or otherwise stupid. I'm not even talking about the individuals that comprise that board. I'm talking about the larger community. I would not want to hold 200 or 300,000 people in that community hostage to the bad decisions of a handful of people. And that's really the only point that I'm trying to make. Somehow, it strikes me philosophically, practically, and from a policy standpoint that if we could have had some structural engagement on that community's part in this process, it would be stronger. I appreciate under the circumstances that you're dealing with what a great job you're doing. And I do not want to suggest in any way that I'm challenging that. So hopefully that's clarifying.
Oh, absolutely it is. Yeah, I understood that. Yeah.
Let me move on to Member Malumed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what you're doing. I wanted to know how many of the current Board of Trustee members are from 7 years ago?
Actually, only one. Only one members. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
They've continued to have elections. And just to be fair here, and I mean to be clear, that there was a progression of different things that happened. Dr. Tyler removed him from the board as executive order required. Then Dr. Ratliff brought him back to the dais. Then the AB 318 was passed, and Assemblymember Dimley at the time insisted that they be removed because the legislation required it. So there's been a kind of a back and forth, and when I re-arrived, I quite frankly thought that they were in violation of the Brown Act. They were going into closed session, making decisions relative to termination and other closed session issues. And so I gently, as I did initially, removed them, and that was it was controversial, but the majority of the board members, but one, have embraced that and understand the wisdom behind it. And I say the wisdom behind it, ACCJC recognizes but one board relative to an accredited institution. That's the El Camino Community College District. And so I have that knowledge, and I've shared it. I'm not hiding secrets here, that they recognize but one board. And so we're going to move the center under the El Camino Community College District, and then segue to that next important goal. And Dr. Curry is viewed by the community at large as their bright, shining star, and he is. And so I think they respect, obviously, and they trust him well in terms of his leadership. And under the circumstances, it's going remarkably well.
Member Davis-Lyman.
Thank you for being here, because I remember you along the way. But I want to ask you, with the sense of good faith, how has the El Camino board involved the Compton board? Not in a formal way, but can you cite some examples that they have extended this sense of good faith to the Compton board, the El Camino?
You know, I don't have, other than I know that Compton Community College District board members attend occasionally El Camino Community College District's board meeting. I know that occurs. Mm-hmm. I know that the president of the Compton board, Trustee Davis, President Davis, communicates with board members over at the other district, El Camino. I know that occurs. I don't have any other specific where they've had workshops together. I don't think that has occurred. And in part, and this isn't a defense. It's an explanation. I think in part they don't want to confuse the process relative to what board is legally required to move the center to that accredited institution, and that we've heard often from ACCJC that the Compton board has no authority relative to that process. And so in part, it's a very fine line that's being walked here. And it does, you know, emotions are high and sensitive, but The only other option we had back day one, was to close the doors.
Right.
And that wasn't viable for that community.
Thank you.
Member Baca, last comment.
Yeah, just very briefly. You know, back when this was happening in real time, other trustee boards were approached,
right,
and very reluctant to do anything that would create the kind of situation which may deteriorate their own situation. So El Camino has to be commended for taking this on, although I think that there is an interest in moving along to a place where the Compton College District can regain accreditation through the process. But just commend El Camino Administration Board for taking this on, because it was quite a task and risk in doing so. So
Yes,
thank
it
you for
was.
your work.
Their own accreditation was at risk, actually, relative to their involvement. I appreciate, Member Baca, you referencing that. I was responsible as your trustee to do the RFP relative to the partnering district. And trust me, I was very aggressive about that. It was a very formal, written, comprehensive document that went out to every institution in the state. I networked. I went to conference rooms at community colleges with the presidents and the chancellors, begging them to respond, not begging them to be the partner. I just wanted responses. I wanted to be able to be competitive. After that entire effort, and Chancellor Drummond did his networking as well, after that entire effort in the state of California, but one community college submitted a formal RFP, and that was El Camino Community College. Only one. You know, Peralta orally prior said they'd come down, and they were nearing sanctions themselves, and that wasn't going to happen. You can't partner if you're on sanctions or nearing sanctions. And so that, I appreciated their offer, but that wasn't going to happen. El Camino Community College District.
Member Baca, I second your comments, and as Tom knows, I was there too. So I remember that well. With that, thank you, Tom Henry, and thank you for the job that you're doing.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, members, if there isn't any new business, and I'm seeing none, and Jerry is going to pass us out some information that I'd like to ask board members to take with them. Do not leave it here. It's for our closed session meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30.
And just for the record, the board will be adjourning to a closed session tomorrow morning on Chancellor's performance review. That's for the record.
Right. And let me. Okay. I've got a disclaimer here. Board members can leave their stuff here. However, the Senate is not responsible for any of the items or what happens to them.
Do you have more of these?
So leave them here at
I
your
need a copy of Henry's. I couldn't
discretion.
print that off.
Hold on one moment,
His
please.
report.
And Jerry?
I didn't get one.
And Jerry?
But I didn't get one. I've gone.
Could you tell us the dinner is at 5:30 at Sapporo, which is at 16th. Yeah, okay, so right around the corner from our
16th Ellen.
our hotel. Yeah, right there. Right there. Chancellor Scott?
I was just wondering, it says public comments. I didn't know whether anybody wanted to make
We didn't have any
no
requests.
Oh,
No requests.
I didn't want somebody out.
Okay, we are adjourned until 8:30 tomorrow.
In jury.